So far in these nuggets on DFS, we've taken a look at full throttle, meaning go ahead and allow DFS to go ahead and replicate 24/7, use all the bandwidth. However, that may not be the most efficient and non-harmful way to do it in a production network. In this nugget, we'll take a look at how to specifically change the scheduling based on our needs, as well as some additional bells and whistles that we can use to tune and tweak DFS. In our environment with DFS, one of the cool things we can do is we can control the replication between various sites. For example, we can have replication between headquarters, site 1 and site 2, but if our topology is like this, where it's hub and spoke with HQ connecting to site 1 and HQ connecting to site 2, but there's no direct connection between site 1 and site 2, that would be an opportunity for us to not do a full mesh replication. Instead, we could do a hub and spoke, which simply means that we have replication that will set up between the servers on HQ and site 1 and the servers on HQ and site 2, but not directly between site 1 and site 2. Because they'd have to route all that traffic through headquarters anyway if this was our logical topology. The other cool thing that we have as far as options with DFS is we can set our servers as read-only or read-write. And the question may come up, well, when would that benefit us? Well, let's imagine that we have site 1 and site 2 and all the users like Bob and Lois and Sally, they're all putting their personal files on a share here on site 1 and site 2. Well, if we set up replication and we replicate the user's data up to HQ, then every night or periodically we can do backups of that data. So maybe we have read-only copies of their data up at HQ, and then we let the backup process back those up, as opposed to having to do the backup process across the wide area network or having local backups at each of the sites. Another application where the read-only option may be helpful is maybe we want to have some corporate files. For example, disaster recovery plans, or acceptable use policies or other documents that we want to control. We could have those be read-write up here at headquarters and replicate them down to site 1 and site 2 respectively and have them be read-only there. Another item that we definitely want to be able to control is the scheduling of when that replication happens. Maybe we schedule the replication of files between HQ and site 1 and HQ and site 2 for times of the day when there's less real-time traffic. So maybe it's at 11 o'clock at night or 2 o'clock in the morning, and we can control that by setting up the scheduling. We can also control the amount of bandwidth the DFS process will take when doing a replication between two sites. And a big part of replication is to identify the files that have changed and then to actually do the replication between the servers who are participating in that replication. And in doing that, there's a process of staging. It's a location in the file system where files that need to be shipped over to a peer are first compressed, put in that folder, and then shipped over to the receiving party. And then the receiving party receives them into their own staging folder and then decompresses those files as it puts those files in the target folder that's part of the DFS namespace. And by default, the staging folder uses 4096 megabytes. That's how big it is. So what if you have a file that you're replicating that's bigger than that? Well, that may be a problem. So what we might want to do is if we have large files that we are expecting to replicate, we might want to increase the size of the staging folder and also keep our eye on Event Viewer to help us indicate that we do have problems with files that can't make it into staging because our staging area is not big enough. And by default, RDC, which is Remote Differential Compression, is on, which means that a file to be replicated is compressed, put in a staging folder, shipped over, and then decompressed from the receiving side staging folder before being placed on the share. And so if we want to turn off compression, we can do that. And for teeny files, files that are less than 64K, because that's a fairly small file size, it won't even bother doing compression on those teeny files. But anything larger than 64K, the remote differential compression or RDC is enabled, and I'll walk you through where you can disable that if you want to. And we'll also take a look in this nugget at some optimization techniques. In addition to having our topology match our logical network topology, for example, making sure site 1 and site 2 are not replicating directly with each other if they have no direct connectivity, and also in addition to setting up scheduling so that replication uses less bandwidth as opposed to full, and only replicates on days or times that we tell it to based on our scheduling. So we're going to do our work here with DFS from our client with remote administration tools. So here on Client NUG, let's go ahead and launch Server Manager from the taskbar. Here in Server Manager, we'll click on Tools, and from the drop-down, we'll select DFS Management. Now, during the initial configuration of our replication group, it asked us about scheduling, but we can also go in and change that scheduling if we want. One way of doing that is to go ahead and expand replication. Now, at the moment, it's not showing us our replication group that we set up a couple nuggets ago. So if it's not showing the replication group, what we can do is click on DFS Management, click here on the link for Add Replication Group to Display, right here, and then go ahead and select the replication group that we want to see and click on OK. And then it will show up over here on the left navigation pane. So from here, we could right-click on this replication group, and then from the drop-down, select Properties. And then from here, all we need to do is simply click on Edit Schedule. So by default, we're scheduled to go ahead and replicate 24/7 full bandwidth. So if we wanted to change that, for example, let's say we wanted to say, let's go ahead and use only 1 megabits per second. And if we didn't want to replicate at all on certain times of the day or certain days of the week, we can simply highlight by clicking and dragging over that portion, let's say Saturday, for example, from midnight to 4 a.m. So at that area highlighted, we then use the drop down and simply say no replication. Or if at certain times of the day we wanted to use more bandwidth, we could go ahead and grab that time. Let's go ahead and use 8 p.m. to midnight on Sundays by clicking and dragging over that range, and then from the drop down saying full replication. That's how we can control and set up the replication schedule and bandwidth usage for DFS. So with those in place, we'll go ahead and click on OK. And then OK one more time. Now that's for the entire group. If we wanted to set those up on a connection by connection basis, we can do that as well. To do that, with the replication group selected, we'd go ahead and click on the Connections tab. And then we would go ahead and select the connection that we're interested in. So if this was a hub and spoke environment, we'd have connections, for example, from HQ to Site 1 and Site 1 to HQ, and HQ to Site 2 and Site 2 to HQ. And we could just click on that connection that we want to modify the schedule for, right-click it, and then from the drop-down select Properties. And here we have a tab. Under the properties of that connection, we have a Schedule tab. So by default, we're using the replication group schedule. That's the one we just modified. If we click on View Schedule, it will show us that. If we click on Cancel, and we say we want to use a custom connection schedule just for this connection, we click that radio button, click Edit Schedule, and then we can modify this further just for that connection. So for this connection, if we did not want to have replication between 6 and 10, we would click and drag over that area. I'm going to use Sunday as an example. Go ahead and use the drop down and say no replication. And then click on OK, and that would apply just to that connection. And then we'll click on OK to dismiss the properties window. It also reflects here under schedule type that we're using a custom connection for that specific connection. Now, regarding the content that we're going to send back and forth and the staging areas that each of these servers is going to use, to configure that, what we would do is click on the replication group over here on the left, and then we'd click on the Memberships tab. And then we could go ahead and click on either one of these members. So let's go ahead and click on Server 2 by right-clicking on it, and from the drop-down selecting Properties. So here on the properties of this member of the replication group, we have a tab for staging. And here's our default staging size in megabytes, and there's the default folder it's going to use for staging. So I'm going to leave the size and the location for the staging folder as they are, and click on Cancel. And while we're here with the replication group selected, if we go back to Connections, the Connections tab, and we right-click on one of the members and go to Properties of one of the members, we have the Schedule tab, which we looked at, to create a custom schedule for the connection. And we also have, under the General tab, the opportunity to disable the remote differential compression. In our lab environment, we do want to use the compression, so I'll go ahead and leave that check there. I'm also going to click on Cancel so we're not making any changes. Now, regarding the optimization of DFS, we want to make sure that we have adequate bandwidth between the sites that we're replicating across. We'd also want to make sure that we're using the compression feature, which is enabled by default. And presuming we have everything technically set up correctly, if it's still slow, we want to make sure that we have enough CPU and memory on the replication servers to handle that replication, in addition to what other services they might be providing. So if we have a system that's really low on RAM and it's swapping out tons of information, a solution to optimization would be to identify that bottleneck and add RAM to that server. Or if we have files, especially large files that just seem to take a long time or don't ever completely replicate, we'd want to take a close look at that staging folder size and to make sure that it's big enough from a staging perspective for the replication servers to replicate the data. We'd also want to be careful that as we work with DFS tuning and scheduling and how much bandwidth we're allocating for that, that we're not harming other production services that are going to suffer whenever the replication is taking place. And that way, the critical services that need to run will still run adequately while we're adding the DFS functionality to our existing infrastructure. So what I invite you to do is to launch the hands-on lab if you haven't already, and take a few moments practicing with the scheduling for the DFS connections and the staging to help reinforce not only the fact that you can do it, but also where it is in the interface that we covered in this nugget. And regarding compression, if you want to use the feature, just make sure you don't turn it off because it is on by default. So thanks for joining me in this nugget. Have a fun time in the lab, and I'll see you in the next video. Meanwhile, I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.